The mansion was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mr. Jonathan Hayes, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city, sat alone at his dining table, staring at a half-finished cup of coffee. His life was filled with success, riches, and power. But none of it mattered when it came to his daughter, Emily. Emily was only 10 years old, born with a condition that left her legs paralyzed. Despite years of therapy, the doctors had told Jonathan that she would never walk. His wife had left years ago, unable to cope with the weight of raising a disabled child. And so Jonathan, buried in work and wealth, left Emily mostly in the care of nannies and maids. On the outside, Jonathan's mansion was a palace, but inside, it was a hollow shell of loneliness and silence. Emily spent most of her days in her wheelchair by the window, watching children in the neighborhood running and laughing. She rarely smiled. One morning, while Jonathan was rushing to leave for an important business meeting, he passed by Emily's room. The maid Maria was kneeling beside the little girl, whispering something softly. Emily's face lit up with a small laugh. Jonathan froze at the door. His daughter hadn't laughed like that in months. He shook it off and hurried to his car. Maria had only been working for Jonathan for 6 months. She was a quiet woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and hands that seemed to carry both strength and gentleness. She wasn't just there to clean or cook. She noticed Emily's loneliness, and unlike the others who kept their distance, she chose to sit beside the girl, talk to her, and listen. As weeks passed, Jonathan started noticing changes. Emily's eyes sparkled a little more. She began humming songs in the hallway. Sometimes Jonathan would come home late at night and hear faint giggles coming from Emily's room. One evening, curiosity got the better of him. He stood quietly outside his daughter's door and peeked inside. What he saw stunned him. Maria had Emily sitting on a chair with her legs carefully strapped, gently massaging them with warm oil. She was speaking to her with determination. "One day, Emily, you will surprise everyone. Don't believe what they say. I believe you will stand. I believe you will walk." Emily's eyes glistened with hope. But they all said, "I can't." Maria shook her head firmly. "Doctors know many things, but they don't know your heart, and a heart full of courage can do miracles." Jonathan stepped back, his throat tightening. He had spent millions on doctors, on specialists, but never once had he told his daughter that he believed in her. He always assumed comfort came from money. But here was his maid, someone he paid a modest wage, giving his daughter something far greater than wealth, faith. Days turned into months. Maria secretly started therapy sessions at home with Emily. She would hold her hands, encourage her to push against small weights, and celebrate every tiny movement. At first, Emily could barely twitch her toes. But Maria never gave up. Jonathan, too, began to change. He started coming home earlier, sometimes watching quietly from the doorway as Maria worked with Emily. For the first time in years, he felt helpless. Not because of his wealth, but because he realized how little he had given his daughter emotionally. One rainy night, Jonathan walked into Emily's room. She was sitting with Maria, practicing lifting her legs slightly from the chair. "Papa!" she cried happily. Jonathan knelt beside her, tears filling his eyes. "Emily, I'm sorry. I should have been here with you more." Maria smiled softly. "She doesn't need your apologies, sir. She just needs you." Jonathan looked at Maria with a mix of gratitude and guilt. I never imagined you would care for her like this. You've given her what I couldn't." But Maria shook her head. "It's not me. It's her strength. I just believed in it." The breakthrough came on a bright Sunday morning. Maria guided Emily to hold onto the railing they had set up in the living room. Jonathan stood nearby, his heart pounding. Emily's hands trembled, her legs shaking, but Maria's voice was steady. "One step, Emily, just one." With tears streaming down her cheeks, Emily pushed her foot forward. It was shaky, small, but it was a step. Jonathan gasped, covering his mouth. His daughter, who doctors had said would never walk, had just taken her first step. Emily looked up at her father, her face glowing with pride. "Papa, I did it!" Jonathan dropped to his knees, holding her tightly as tears fell. "Yes, my angel, you did it. You're stronger than anyone I know." From that day forward, Jonathan's life changed. He cut down his business hours to spend more time with Emily. He hired better therapists to support the work Maria had started. But most importantly, he gave his daughter his time, his encouragement, and his love. And Maria, she refused any extra reward Jonathan offered. "Sir," she said gently, "I didn't do this for money. I did it because no child should grow up believing they are less than others. Sometimes, all they need is someone to believe in them." The story of Emily's first steps spread quietly among the family and close friends, but Jonathan never boasted about it in public. He knew the real credit didn't belong to him, but to the maid who had taught him the greatest lesson of his life. True wealth isn't measured by money, but by love, compassion, and faith. And so, the mansion that once echoed with silence was now filled with laughter, hope, and the sound of small but determined footsteps. Jonathan Hayes was a man who, from the outside, seemed to possess everything a person could ever dream of. His name was synonymous with success, his mansion towered over the hillside like a fortress of wealth, and his bank accounts overflowed with numbers that most people could not even imagine in their wildest fantasies. His business empire stretched across continents, his face appeared in magazines, and his handshake was sought after by powerful men who respected his mind and envied his fortune. But for all the glittering lights and triumphs that surrounded him, his personal life was a shadowed room filled with silence and distance. Inside the walls of his grand estate, the man who could command boardrooms with his voice struggled to hear the faint laughter of his own child. Emily, his only daughter, had been born with a condition that left her unable to use her legs. From the moment she entered the world, her life was wrapped in a quiet kind of suffering. Doctors tried, therapies were prescribed, specialists were consulted, but all of them carried the same solemn tone when they spoke of her future. They said she would never walk, that she would never run in the garden with other children, that her life would always be confined to a chair with wheels. Those words fell on Jonathan's ears like chains being locked around his daughter's destiny. And yet, rather than breaking those chains with love and devotion, Jonathan buried himself deeper into his work. He convinced himself that wealth could be her comfort, that material abundance could replace what she lacked, that the latest medical equipment, the best nurses, and the most advanced therapies would be enough. The truth, however, was far colder. Emily's world was quiet and lonely. The mansion was filled with maids and staff, yet Emily felt like a ghost wandering through halls too large for her. She spent hours by the wide windows, gazing out at the children from nearby homes who played together in the fields. She watched them chase each other, fall and rise again, their voices echoing with joy and freedom. Her eyes often welled up, but she never cried loud enough for anyone to hear. She did not want to disturb the rhythm of the house, where everyone seemed busy with tasks that had nothing to do with her. Jonathan, though he loved his daughter in his own guarded way, rarely gave her more than a passing glance before rushing off to meetings. His heart ached when he looked at her, but instead of drawing closer, he pulled further away. Guilt whispered in his chest, so he drowned it with schedules, phone calls, and endless work. Whenever he returned home late at night, he would tiptoe past her room and peek inside, only to see her sleeping quietly, a doll by her side, the moonlight casting a pale glow on her small frame. He would whisper goodnight, though she never heard him, and then retreat into his study where the walls were covered in plaques and trophies, yet empty of warmth. The distance between father and daughter widened with each passing year. Emily learned not to ask for his attention, not to hope for moments with him. When he was around, she smiled politely, but her eyes carried a silent plea that went unnoticed. For Jonathan, success was measured in contracts signed, deals closed, and profits multiplied. For Emily, success would have been something as simple as her father sitting with her, listening to her stories, holding her hand when the silence grew too heavy. In his mind, Jonathan told himself he was doing the best he could. He had provided Emily with the finest wheelchair, with a room filled with toys, with tutors who came from the best schools. He believed that comfort and luxury could fill the void left by her condition. Yet the reality was that Emily's heart ached for something money could never buy. She longed for companionship, for encouragement, for the assurance that even though she could not run, she was not any less valuable than those children she watched from the window. The house itself reflected Jonathan's approach to life. The mansion was grand, with chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds and hallways that seemed endless, but it was cold, almost lifeless. The laughter of a child was rarely heard there, the warmth of family dinners had long disappeared, and even the servants walked quietly, as if afraid to disturb the silence that hung in the air. The absence of a mother only deepened the emptiness. Emily's mother had left years earlier, overwhelmed by the weight of raising a disabled child, and Jonathan had never truly forgiven her for abandoning them. But instead of stepping up to fill that emotional void, he drowned himself in the one thing he knew how to control: business. Still, beneath his composed exterior, Jonathan carried a quiet torment. There were nights when he sat alone in his study, staring at the photo of Emily as a baby in his arms, wondering where he had gone wrong. He knew his daughter needed more than nurses and tutors, but he felt unqualified to give her what she needed most. He feared her pain, he feared her disappointment, and in that fear, he stayed away, convincing himself that distance was less cruel than facing her reality head-on. Yet, every time he caught a glimpse of her fragile smile, something in his chest cracked a little more. The contradiction of his life became clearer each day. He was a man celebrated for his leadership, admired for his ability to build empires, envied for his control over vast fortunes. And yet, in his own home, he was powerless. He could command respect in a boardroom, but he could not summon a smile from his daughter without help. He could buy skyscrapers, but he could not buy the sound of her laughter. He could secure contracts worth billions, but he could not secure her belief that she was loved and cherished. Jonathan's story in that season of life was the story of a man who had everything and yet nothing. He thought success was about conquering the world, while failing to see that his true calling was much closer, sitting quietly in a wheelchair by the window, waiting for him to notice. His wealth shielded him from the struggles that ordinary fathers faced, but it also blinded him from the truth that love, not money, was the most valuable gift he could give. And though he could not see it yet, the gap between him and Emily was about to be bridged not by his power or wealth, but by someone he least expected, someone whose quiet presence in the mansion would awaken in both father and daughter a new understanding of what it meant to live, to hope, and to love. Maria was unlike anyone else who had worked in Jonathan Hayes' mansion before. She was a woman in her early 40s, with a face weathered by years of hardship, yet softened by a natural kindness that seemed to shine in her eyes. She had come to the estate quietly, without fanfare, hired simply as another maid to cook, clean, and tend to the house. To Jonathan, she was just another employee among many, another name on the payroll. But to Emily, Maria would become something far greater. From the very first day she noticed her, Maria saw not just a wealthy man's daughter sitting in a wheelchair, but a lonely child carrying the weight of silence on her small shoulders. While other maids kept their distance, treating Emily as part of the household furniture, Maria was drawn to her. She saw the way Emily's eyes lingered on the window for hours, how her small fingers absent-mindedly fiddled with the wheels of her chair, how she sighed softly when she thought no one was listening. Maria understood loneliness. She had lived much of her life with it as her companion. She knew the look of a child who longed for connection, for someone to see her not as a burden, but as a person full of life waiting to be nurtured. At first, Emily was cautious. She had grown used to people who came and went, caretakers who offered routine care but little warmth. When Maria bent down to her level one afternoon and asked if she wanted to hear a story while she worked in her room, Emily blinked at her with surprise. No one had offered her that in a long time. Slowly, almost shyly, she nodded. Maria began weaving tales as she dusted the shelves and folded clothes, stories of faraway places, of children who faced challenges but found courage in unexpected ways. Emily's face lit up as she listened, her small hands clasped tightly together, her mind momentarily lifted from the reality of her confinement. Over the days that followed, Maria made it a habit to spend time with Emily beyond her assigned duties. She would bring her small flowers from the garden and place them in a cup by her window. She sang lullabies from her own childhood when Emily felt restless at night. She even learned what foods Emily liked most and secretly prepared them, sneaking little treats into her room with a conspiratorial smile. Each small gesture was a thread, and together they began weaving a bond that grew stronger with every passing moment. Emily, for the first time in years, began to laugh again. Her laughter was soft, hesitant at first, as though she had forgotten how it sounded, but Maria encouraged it. She played little games with her, clapped when Emily answered questions correctly during her lessons, and told jokes in her gentle way that made the girl giggle uncontrollably. The mansion that had been so quiet for so long now carried echoes of a child's joy, faint but unmistakable, carried through the hallways like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Jonathan noticed it one morning when he passed by Emily's door. He heard the sound of his daughter's giggle, high, pitched and bright, mingling with Maria's soothing voice. He stopped in his tracks, startled. He could not remember the last time Emily had laughed like that. He peeked inside briefly and saw Maria kneeling beside Emily's chair, whispering something that made the little girl throw her head back in amusement. He didn't step in, didn't say a word. He just left quickly for work, but the sound stayed with him all day. Maria's attention went beyond light-hearted moments. She was observant, noticing the subtle way Emily avoided talking about her condition. One afternoon, As she massaged Emily's legs with warm oil to keep her blood flowing, she whispered, "Do you know something, Emily? You are stronger than you think." Emily looked at her with wide eyes, uncertain. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Everyone else around her had always told her what she couldn't do, what she would never be able to achieve. Maria's words were different. They were filled with faith, not pity. When Emily hesitated, Maria leaned closer, her voice steady and firm. "Doctors know many things, but they don't know the strength of your heart. A heart that refuses to give up can do things that seem impossible." The little girl swallowed hard, her lips trembling. For years she had carried the belief that she was broken, that she was less than the children she watched outside. Maria's words planted something new inside her, a seed of hope she hadn't dared to dream of. From that day, Maria made it her mission to remind Emily of her worth. She told her stories of people who overcame great struggles, who turned weakness into strength. She celebrated every tiny effort Emily made, whether it was lifting her legs slightly during exercises or holding herself upright in her chair for longer than before. She refused to let Emily sink into despair, pulling her out of it with patience and encouragement. The other staff noticed the changes. Emily, once quiet and withdrawn, now spoke more openly. She asked Maria questions, laughed when she made mistakes, and even began drawing little pictures that she would proudly show to her. The walls of her room, once bare and dull, were now decorated with her sketches, small signs of life and creativity. The servants whispered among themselves, surprised at how the maid had managed what no one else had in years. Jonathan, though still distant, could not ignore what was happening. He began to come home earlier, curious to see the transformation for himself. Sometimes he stood in the hallway watching Maria and Emily together. There were moments when he felt a pang of guilt deep in his chest, realizing that his daughter's joy came not from him, but from a woman he barely knew. At times he even felt jealous, though he would never admit it out loud. But more than anything, he felt gratitude. A gratitude so profound that it made him question everything he thought he knew about fatherhood. Maria never sought recognition for what she was doing. To her, Emily was not a duty, not a responsibility that came with her employment. She saw Emily as a child who deserved love, who needed someone to believe in her when the world had told her otherwise. She gave of herself quietly, without expectation, without demand. Her reward was the glow in Emily's eyes when she laughed, the small victories that others might overlook but she celebrated with joy. Slowly, Emily began to change not just in spirit, but in her body too. She grew more determined, more willing to try the little exercises Maria encouraged her to do. Where once she had accepted the doctor's verdict that she would never walk, now she held on to Maria's words with a fragile but growing faith. She began to believe, for the first time, that maybe her life was not defined by her wheelchair. Maybe there was more waiting for her than watching from behind glass windows. Maria's presence in Emily's life was like the first spark in a dark room. It did not banish all the shadows at once, but it showed that light was possible, that hope could exist even in the most silent of places. For Emily, that was everything she needed to begin dreaming again. And for Jonathan, though he had yet to fully understand it, Maria was about to teach him the most valuable lesson his wealth had never been able to buy. Maria had always believed that hope was not enough if it was not followed by action. She could see the spark in Emily's eyes whenever she encouraged her, the way her small fingers gripped the armrest of her chair with determination, the way her smile lingered just a little longer when someone told her she was strong. But Maria also knew that words alone could not change Emily's life. Something more had to be done, something that would give the little girl more than just temporary comfort. It had to give her the chance to fight for herself, to push her body in ways that the world had long given up on. And so, Maria began what no one else in the household dared to attempt. She started therapy with Emily herself, not as a doctor, not as a nurse, but as someone who simply refused to accept that the child's story was already written. It began quietly, without drawing attention. Maria would set aside time every day, often in the mornings when the house was still calm, or in the afternoons when Jonathan was away at work. She would close the door to Emily's room and transform it from a place of quiet waiting into a place of determination. The bed became a support for exercises, the armchair a station for strengthening, the soft carpeted floor a space for stretching. She knew she didn't have professional training, but she had something even stronger, an unshakable belief that Emily could achieve more than she had been told. At first, the sessions were simple. Maria would gently massage Emily's legs with warm oil, encouraging blood flow and easing stiffness. As she did, she whispered encouragement. Feel this, Emily. These legs are yours. They may not move the way others do, but they belong to you and they are not useless. They just need time. They need love, and they need you to believe in them." Emily listened, her eyes wide, sometimes unsure, sometimes hopeful. It was strange to hear someone speak about her body as though it had potential, not limitation. When Emily managed to wiggle a toe after weeks of massage, Maria celebrated it as though it was the grandest achievement in the world. She clapped her hands, kissed Emily's forehead, and said, "See, I told you. This is the beginning." For Emily, that tiny movement was a miracle. For years she had been told what she could not do, and here was proof, small but undeniable, that her body could respond. The joy in that moment was enough to give her courage for the next step. Maria introduced small exercises, carefully designed so Emily would not feel overwhelmed. She had her push lightly against resistance with her legs, even if they barely moved. She taught her how to hold herself upright for a little longer each day, strengthening her back and core. She turned therapy into games, cheering every attempt, making every effort feel like a victory. Sometimes Emily would fall into tears, frustrated when her body did not respond the way she wanted. Maria never scolded her, never allowed despair to linger. She simply wiped her tears and said softly, "Every great story has struggles. You're writing your own story, Emily, and every attempt you make is another word written on its pages." Jonathan began noticing subtle changes in his daughter. When he returned home from work, he saw her sitting taller in her chair, her face glowing with a newfound energy. She began to talk more, her voice carrying hints of excitement instead of resignation. She told him about the games. She played with Maria, though she never revealed the true depth of the therapy they were doing. Jonathan listened with polite interest, never realizing at first that his maid was giving his daughter something that doctors had failed to provide: a reason to believe in herself. It was during one late evening that Jonathan discovered the truth. He had returned home earlier than expected and was walking past Emily's room when he heard Maria's steady voice. Curious, he stopped outside the door. Peering in, he saw Emily gripping the edge of her bed, her arms trembling as she tried to pull herself forward, her face twisted in effort. Maria knelt beside her, holding her gently but not doing the work for her. "You can do this," she whispered. "Don't look at the chair. Look at me. Just try. That's all I ask. Just try." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. For the first time in years, he saw his daughter not as a fragile child bound by limitations, but as a fighter, sweat on her forehead, determination in her eyes. He wanted to step in to ask questions, but something held him back. He realized that in this moment, Maria's voice carried more power for Emily than his ever had. He slipped away quietly, shaken by what he had witnessed. As the weeks went on, the progress became undeniable. Emily could lift her legs slightly now, her movements clumsy but real. She could hold herself upright for minutes without collapsing back into her chair. Maria never compared her to other children, never spoke of what she could not do. She focused only on what was possible, what was achievable that day, and that was enough. The bond between them grew unbreakable. Emily trusted Maria completely, leaning on her not just physically but emotionally, opening her heart in ways she had never dared with anyone else. The biggest challenge came not from Emily's body, but from her mind. There were days when she doubted herself, when she stared at her useless legs and felt the weight of despair pressing down. "What if they're right?" she asked one night, her voice trembling. "What if I really can't walk? What if I try and nothing ever changes?" Maria knelt beside her, took her hands into hers, and spoke firmly, her voice carrying both gentleness and authority. "Emily, you are not defined by what they say. Even if the whole world says you cannot, if you believe you can, then you must try. And even if the journey is hard, even if it takes time, remember this: you are not alone. I will walk every step of this journey with you." Those words anchored Emily, pulling her out of the darkness. With Maria by her side, she found strength she never knew she had. She began to see her body not as broken, but as something that could change, even if slowly, even if painfully. She began to see herself as capable, worthy, strong. Every secret session in that quiet room brought her closer to something that had once seemed impossible. Every massage, every whispered encouragement, every tiny victory stacked together like bricks building a foundation of faith. Maria believed in her so fiercely that Emily had no choice but to begin believing too. And though Jonathan still stood at a distance, uncertain of his role, he could no longer deny that something extraordinary was happening within his own home. Jonathan had always thought of himself as a man in control. He controlled numbers, companies, schedules, entire rooms of powerful men who listened when he spoke. But in his own home, he had unknowingly lost control of something far more important, his role as a father. For years, he had buried his guilt beneath layers of business meetings and wealth, telling himself that providing material comfort was enough. Yet the more he watched Maria with Emily, the more he realized how little he had truly given. What shook him most was not just what Maria was doing for Emily, but what her care revealed about his own absence. At first, he had told himself it was harmless, even admirable, that the maid gave his daughter attention. He had convinced himself that Emily needed companionship while he worked. But each time he came home to hear her laughter, each time he saw her eyes light up in ways they never had around him, the illusion of his adequacy began to crumble. He started to see the truth he had long avoided, that Emily's life had been starved not of money, not of opportunities, but of love, encouragement, and presence. One evening, he returned home quietly after cutting a meeting short. The house was unusually alive with sound, not from the staff but from Emily's room upstairs. Drawn by the unfamiliar warmth of laughter, he climbed the staircase and stopped outside her door. Inside, Maria was kneeling on the carpet, clapping her hands rhythmically as Emily pushed against the bed frame, trying to lift herself forward. Her little arms strained, her legs trembled slightly, and sweat beaded on her forehead, but her expression was filled with determination. Maria's voice was steady and strong. "That's it, Emily. Just one more try. You're stronger than you think. Don't give up." Emily panted heavily, her face red, but when she managed to hold herself upright for a few seconds longer than usual, Maria cheered as though the child had conquered the world. Jonathan stood frozen, his chest tightening. He could not remember a time when he had cheered his daughter for anything, not because he didn't care, but because he had convinced himself she needed pity, not praise. Now he saw the flaw in that thinking. His daughter didn't need pity. She needed someone to believe in her, someone who celebrated even the smallest step forward. He slipped away before they noticed him, but the image followed him to his study and haunted him long into the night. In the days that followed, Jonathan began to observe more closely. He noticed how Emily looked at Maria with a kind of reverence, how she reached for her hand instinctively when she was frightened, how her smile blossomed in her presence. He noticed how Maria never once looked at Emily with sorrow or treated her as fragile, but instead with respect and encouragement. Jonathan realized painfully that his daughter had found in Maria something she had never found in him, unconditional belief. Guilt gnawed at him. He replayed moments in his mind when he had brushed past Emily with a quick word, when he had left for work instead of sitting with her, when he had chosen another late meeting over an evening by her side. He remembered the nights he had stood outside her room, whispering goodnight without ever stepping inside. Those memories, once numbed by routine, now pierced him like sharp thorns. He could no longer deny that his absence had shaped her loneliness, and Maria's presence was healing what he had broken. One night, unable to contain his feelings, Jonathan stepped into Emily's room during one of their quiet sessions. Emily was sitting upright, her cheeks flushed from effort, while Maria massaged her legs with slow, practiced movements. Both turned to him in surprise. For a moment, he stood awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Then he walked over and knelt beside his daughter. "Emily," he said softly, his voice trembling, "I'm so proud of you." The words felt strange on his tongue, unfamiliar, but they carried weight. Emily's eyes widened, her lips parting as though she could not believe she had heard them. Tears welled up as she whispered, "Really, Papa?" He nodded, fighting his own tears. "Really, you're stronger than anyone I know." Maria looked on quietly, her face calm, but in her eyes was a glimmer of understanding. She knew what those words meant, not just to Emily, but to Jonathan. She had seen the distance between father and daughter, and she understood how deep the wounds of neglect ran. She had never blamed him openly, but she had silently wished he would see what he was missing. In that moment, she saw a man beginning to wake up to the truth. From then on, Jonathan tried to be more present. He began coming home earlier, sometimes sitting in on Emily's exercises, clapping awkwardly as she completed small movements. He asked Maria to teach him some of the routines so he could help when she was unavailable. At first, Emily was hesitant, unaccustomed to his involvement, but soon she grew to love his presence, and her smiles came more easily when he was near. Jonathan, for his part, struggled to reconcile the father he had been with the father he was trying to become. The weight of his past neglect did not vanish overnight, but he pressed forward, determined to do better. Yet even as he grew closer to Emily, Jonathan could not shake the feeling of awe toward Maria. What she had accomplished with his daughter was something no doctor, no expensive specialist, had managed to achieve. She had given Emily back her spirit. She had breathed life into a home that had been silent for too long. And perhaps most importantly, she had forced Jonathan to confront the emptiness of his own choices. Late one evening, after putting Emily to bed, Jonathan found Maria in the kitchen cleaning up. He paused at the doorway, unsure how to begin. Finally, he spoke. "Maria, I never expected you to care for my daughter the way you do. You've done more for her in these months than I have in years." She shook her head gently. "Sir, I only did what any heart would do when it sees a child who needs love. Emily doesn't need riches. She doesn't need pity. She needs someone to believe she is more than her condition." Jonathan's throat tightened. For a man who had always prided himself on being strong, he suddenly felt small, humbled by the wisdom of a woman society might overlook. He realized that the true measure of wealth was not in the accounts he managed but in the love and faith given freely to those who needed it most. In the quiet of his grand mansion, Jonathan found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. All his life he had chased success, thinking it would secure happiness for himself and for his family. Yet here, in the bond between his daughter and a maid, he saw a truth more powerful than any fortune he could build. Emily's healing was not just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. And it was being led not by his money, but by compassion, patience, and faith, the very things he had failed to offer her. The breakthrough came on a quiet Sunday morning, one of those mornings when the air felt fresh and the sunlight streamed gently through the tall windows of the mansion. Emily had been working with Maria for months, her body growing stronger in small but undeniable ways. What had once been impossible now seemed just within reach. She could hold herself upright longer than before. She could shift her weight slightly when supported, and she had learned to push through moments of pain and fatigue with determination rather than tears. The sessions that began as secret therapy had slowly become the heartbeat of her days, the moments she looked forward to more than anything else. Maria's voice had become her anchor, guiding her through every attempt, reminding her that progress was not measured by leaps but by tiny steps of faith and effort. That morning, Maria prepared Emily for something different. She set up the railing Jonathan had quietly ordered to be installed in the living room after finally understanding the seriousness of what Maria was doing. It was a simple wooden bar, sturdy and strong, fixed firmly between two supports. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary structure. But to Emily, it was a doorway to a dream she had never thought possible. Maria knelt in front of her and gently held her hands. "Today we try something new," she whispered, her eyes steady with encouragement. "Today you'll take a step." Emily's heart raced. Fear and excitement clashed inside her. For years she had been told her legs were useless, that walking was a miracle she would never see. Even as she trusted Maria, doubt pressed against her chest. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing, her small body shaking under the weight of expectation. Jonathan stood nearby, his hands clasped tightly together, his jaw clenched. He had told himself he would stay calm, but his heart pounded louder than he had ever felt in a boardroom. This was not a negotiation, not a business deal. This was his daughter fighting against destiny itself. Maria's voice was firm but gentle. "Don't think about what the doctors said. Don't think about what anyone told you. Just think about this moment. You have the strength. Trust yourself. Trust your legs. Trust me." Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of fear mixed with hope. She tightened her grip, her knuckles white, and with every ounce of courage she had, she leaned forward. Her legs shook violently, refusing at first to obey, but Maria was right there, steadying her without carrying her, guiding without controlling. The first movement was barely more than a shift of weight, but it was enough to send a shock through the room. Jonathan gasped, covering his mouth with his hand, his eyes wide. Emily pressed harder, her right foot dragging slightly forward, an inch at a time until finally it landed ahead of the other. It was clumsy, unsteady, and short, but it was a step. Maria's eyes glistened with tears as she whispered, "That's it, Emily. You did it. You took your first step." The little girl let out a sob, half from exhaustion, half from joy. She looked up at her father, her face glowing. "Papa, I did it!" The words were broken but powerful, the declaration of a child who had just shattered the chains of impossibility that had bound her for years. Jonathan's knees gave way as he dropped down beside her, tears streaming freely down his face. He took her small hands in his and kissed them, his voice cracking with emotion. "Yes, my angel, you did it. You're stronger than anyone I know. I am so proud of you." Maria stood back quietly, allowing the father and daughter to embrace. She did not need to share in the spotlight of the moment. For her, the victory was Emily's, and the tears on Jonathan's face were proof that the walls between him and his daughter were finally crumbling. She knew that one step was not the end. It was only the beginning, but she also knew that beginnings like this could change entire lives. Emily's determination grew even stronger after that day. Each attempt, each shaky step forward, was celebrated not as a miracle but as the natural reward of persistence and courage. She began to believe not only in the possibility of walking but also in her own strength as a person. The wheelchair that had once been her prison became less of a symbol of limitation and more of a tool she used while working toward greater independence. Her laughter filled the mansion more often, her confidence spreading like warmth through every corner of the house. For Jonathan, that single step was a turning point. He realized in that moment how much he had underestimated his daughter's spirit and how much he had relied on others to do what he should have done as a father. He began rearranging his priorities, making space in his life not just for business but for Emily. He cut down on late-night meetings, insisted on spending his mornings with her before leaving for work, and often sat with Maria to learn what exercises he could help her with. He wanted to be more than a provider. He wanted to be present, to be a source of encouragement, to be the father Emily deserved. Emily's progress became a journey for the entire household. The staff, once used to walking quietly through the mansion, now often paused at the living room door to watch her practice. They would clap softly, offer words of encouragement, and celebrate her victories as though they were their own. The house, once cold and silent, was transformed into a place alive with hope and inspiration. What had once been a hollow palace of wealth became a true home, not because of money, but because of the love and determination that now filled its walls. Maria continued to guide Emily with unwavering patience. She never allowed her to settle into complacency, never let her believe that one step was enough. "We don't stop here," she would say gently. "Every day is another chance, another victory waiting to happen." She made sure Emily understood that progress was not about perfection but about persistence. Emily listened, her spirit growing stronger, her heart filled with gratitude for the woman who had believed in her when no one else did. And though Jonathan still carried guilt for the years he had missed, he found peace in knowing that his daughter's journey was no longer one she walked alone. He was there now, not as a distant figure, but as a father who finally understood what mattered most. And each time Emily took another shaky step, he felt as though he, too, was learning to walk again, not with his legs, but with his heart, relearning the meaning of love, faith, and family. Jonathan had spent a lifetime chasing wealth, building empires, and surrounding himself with luxury, but the day he saw his daughter take her first step, something inside him shifted permanently. That moment was burned into his soul, a reminder that all the cars, houses, and boardroom victories he had accumulated meant nothing compared to the trembling courage of his little girl. For years, he had believed his fortune was the greatest proof of success, yet in that one instant, he realized his real treasure had been sitting in a wheelchair, waiting for him to see her. He looked back at the years he had buried himself in work, convincing himself that providing money was the same as providing love, and the weight of regret pressed down on him harder than any business failure ever could. But regret, for once, did not paralyze him. It became fuel, a reason to do better, to redefine what wealth meant in his life. Emily's small victories became his new milestones. Where once he celebrated business deals, now he celebrated the moment she stood a few seconds longer without help, the moment she managed to move both feet forward, the moment she laughed with joy rather than cried with frustration. Each achievement lit up his world, each smile reminded him of what he had almost missed. Maria's presence was another truth he could no longer ignore. She had not only cared for his daughter, she had believed in her, invested her time, heart, and strength in ways he himself had failed to do. He often found himself watching Maria, wondering what kind of love could drive someone to give so much without asking for anything in return. He had hired her as a maid, but she had become a healer, a teacher, and an angel to his family. The house began to change. Where it had once been a cold place echoing with silence, it grew warm with the sound of Emily's laughter, Maria's encouragement, and Jonathan's presence. The staff no longer tiptoed around in quietness. They became part of Emily's journey, clapping when she took a new step, smiling when she accomplished something new. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt his mansion was more than stone and glass. It was home, because home was no longer defined by its walls but by the love that lived inside them. Jonathan started to question everything he had once held sacred. He thought of the late nights in his office, the dinners he had missed, the birthdays he had cut short with a phone call, the tears Emily must have cried when she longed for his presence but received only expensive gifts in return. He had been blinded by ambition, chasing an illusion of success that left his daughter starved for love. And yet, despite his absence, she still looked at him with eyes full of hope, still called him Papa, with a voice that melted every defense in his heart. He knew he could never erase the past, but he could rewrite the future, step by shaky step, just as Emily was doing. He began to spend less time at the office, entrusting responsibilities to managers he once refused to delegate to. When people asked why, his answer was simple: "My daughter needs me." Business associates were surprised. Some even mocked the change, but Jonathan no longer cared. For the first time, his priorities were clear, and no profit or contract could outweigh the joy of watching Emily grow stronger. He would sit by her side during exercises, sometimes holding her hands, sometimes just sitting quietly, letting her know she was not alone. And every time her legs shook but held, every time she stumbled but tried again, he saw his own reflection in her resilience. Maria continued to guide both father and daughter. She taught Jonathan how to support Emily's therapy, how to encourage her without pity, how to push her gently without breaking her spirit. She reminded him that Emily's strength came not from him or her, but from within herself. And Jonathan listened, humbled, realizing that true leadership was not about control but about love, patience, and faith. The more time he spent in those sessions, the more he discovered himself stripped of wealth and titles, just a father learning how to love. As weeks turned into months, Emily's progress blossomed. She went from single steps to walking short distances, from shaky balance to moments of surprising steadiness. Each time she would look at her father, her eyes shining with pride, and Jonathan would feel his chest swell with a happiness he had never known in boardrooms or banks. Maria's encouragement never wavered, and together, the three of them built a rhythm, a bond stronger than any chain of gold. But the greatest transformation was not in Emily's body, nor in Jonathan's schedule. It was in his heart. He finally understood that true wealth was not what the world saw when he drove expensive cars or signed million-dollar contracts. True wealth was sitting on the floor beside his daughter, clapping when she managed 3 steps in a row. It was the warmth of Maria's smile when she saw the family she had helped mend. It was the realization that faith, love, and compassion could achieve what money could never buy. Jonathan often found himself looking out the window at night, reflecting on the journey. He wondered why it had taken him so long to realize what mattered most. He thought of his own childhood, of a father who had measured love in discipline and provision, and he promised himself he would break that cycle. Emily would grow up not doubting her worth, not wondering if her father loved her, but knowing without question that she was his greatest treasure. He would tell her every day not with gifts, but with his time, his words, and his presence. In those moments of reflection, gratitude overwhelmed him. Gratitude for Emily's courage, for Maria's faith, and for the second chance life had given him to be the father he was meant to be. He knew he could never pay Maria back for what she had given, but he vowed she would always be part of their family, not as a maid, but as someone who had rewritten their story with love. Jonathan's empire still existed, the wealth still flowed, but he no longer saw it as his identity. It was simply a tool, something to use for good rather than to worship. The emptiness he had once tried to fill with possessions was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose that came only from love. And as he watched Emily grow stronger, her laughter echoing through the halls, he finally felt rich, not in money, but in the only currency that truly mattered: love, compassion, and faith.